Hello and welcome back. Today we will be doing a recap of week 2 of season 1 of the 3v3v3 community competitive games. In this we will also be discussing any sort of rule changes as well as new power rankings for the countries that are, we have a little spreadsheet for this and this sort of thing. But let's just jump into it and talk about a recap of last week's game. So the draft started out with Team 1 picking up France, Team 2 picking up Austria and Prussia, Team 3 picking up Qing, UK, and Russia, and then Team 1 drafting, who already had France, would then drafted the USA and the East India Company. And then, finally, Team 2, which already had Prussia and Austria, drafted the Ottoman Empire, and this was the draft. The general consensus following the draft was that Team 3 won the draft, and notably, Team 3, who had drafted the UK, Qing, and Russia, traded the UK to Team 1 for France. So now, Team 3 has France, Qing, and Russia, and Team 1 had the UK, East India Company, and USA. And they did this because they didn't want any of the nastiness involved with, owning the East India Company. Now, as you can see from the map, a lot has happened. The East India Company is no more. It's now part of the United States, and the UK, this happened. And so it was a very exciting game. Definitely saw a lot of developments, but let's start from the beginning, which kind of opened up with an interesting situation where Kebab went for Persia, and then Russia joined on the side of Persia. Now, what probably should have happened is Austria-Hungary and Prussia should have maybe declared an interest in Persia so that they could help the Ottomans out. They then had a bit of a scuffed diplomacy where they agreed not to take each other's stuff for the duration of the episode or the duration of, what was going on. Mind you, if you break a diplomatic agreement, it is allowed, but you suffer a 5% penalty to your score. And so what ended up happening is they had an agreement not to interfere with each other, but Russia still denied the Ottoman Empire's kind of expansion into Persia, which is not what Team 2 had thought what was going on, but it was not explicit in their agreement that Russia would back down and not interfere. So Russia ends up picking up Persia, and Ottomans has to eat all of that infamy, the negative infamy that they had gotten. Notably, Austria-Hungary also declared on Russia, and, instead of enforcing, what they did is they just backed down because they thought that Ottomans were going to pick up Persia, and they backed down when there was a war reps war goal, and so they ended up for 5 years just paying war reps to Russia. So this was kind of an interesting display of diplomacy in regards to what was going on. My feeling at the time was that Russia didn't declare on Persia at opening, and Persian states are of a culture that is accepted or easier to accept by the Ottoman Empire, so I thought Ottomans were fine going for it, but they maybe should have been careful because it seems to be that Russia often opens up with going for Persia, in our very, very large sample size of 2 full games. So that's kind of what happened. And then, despite the fact that everyone kind of agreed that Team 3 had the best draft, and that was Qing, Russia, and France, Team 1 started running away with the game. And I do think that there was, a bit of a skill difference. I think that they were really cranking up the GDP. You can see the endgame GDP, which might not be indicative of Team 1's kind of prowess, but the United States did have some come up. The US, East India Company, and Great Britain were just running away with the game. And then we saw, notably, I'd just like to point out, I really like the US's expansion plan, where they did go after the gold states, going after Transvaal first, to cut off Oranje. They went for Peru, Bolivia, which I think is very strong as an opener, and they also went for Mexico and did annex it. We didn't see anyone intentionally reset their infamy, which is an interesting thing you can do. Once you have over 100 infamy, you can have an ally cut you down to size before you enforce. So something USA could have done is they could have declared on Mexico, then they could have found another 30 infamy by expelling diplomats, and then they could have had one of their allies cut them down to size before they enforced on Mexico, and that way they couldn't be cut down to size. Notably, cut down to size is bugged though, and it will release all your subjects, so this is not a play you can make with the UK. But anyways, Team 1 was just steamrolling, just absolutely running away with the game. And that it was the East India Company, the UK, and USA. And so Teams 2 and 3 both got together and they decided to carve up the UK. And I really think that this is the weakness of the UK. In particular, the UK looks like they can expand very, very, very quickly. A whole lot of construction, especially because they have their subjects paying into them. They're going to accumulate a lot of money, and they could use this money for construction, and so it's not necessarily evident, but a big problem with the UK is they are very vulnerable to landings because they cannot move their capital off the coast. They have the home counties. They can, if Midlands, it still has a coast. East Anglia still has a coast. West Counties, coast. So it's almost impossible to avoid enforcement. What happened is they just put like 20 landings in on Great Britain. And this created enormous performance issues in the game, and the game kept crashing. Moving forward, what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and go speed 3. And also, if going speed 3 when there's a PvP war is not good enough, what we will also do in addition to that is we will limit each team to 12 landings per war. So it's roughly, 4 landings a player, because this caused enormous performance issues, but they did get the enforcement down on the UK eventually. Kind of just briefly talking about, I want to talk about Team 2's draft actually a little bit before we kind of talk about let's talk about how all this resolved. But what the USA did, and this is very interesting and something you could do, they bricked a ton of the war goals against the UK. Notably, they're on the same team as the UK, and they have a bunch of UK provinces. What the USA did is they declared war on the UK to transfer the East India Company, and also to take these provinces, and the whole idea was the UK would back down to their ally to keep the GDP inside, USA's market, this sort of thing. And so they were successful at doing that, kind of trapping the GDP in there. And this was a bit interesting. They had plans to annex the East India Company and then just release it. The idea being that you would get better tech or something like this, but then East India Company is not a releasable. You can't release them. You might be able to release India, I'm not 100% sure, but you would need pan-nationalism first. Okay. I just wanted to comment on Team 2's draft, who had Prussia, Austria, and Ottomans. I actually think that this was a decent draft. They picked, the problem is that Prussia and Austria-Hungary they picked these second and third pick. They might be too weak for second and third pick, but I really like the pairings because you can form Giga Germany, and what was apparently their plan is they wanted to form Mega Germany and then release Italy, because if one of your teammates gets full annex, you can release someone. So Austria-Hungary was trying to conquer all of Italy, and their idea was to have Germany and Italy, and also Ottomans. It's all nice and snaked together and connected, which makes like trade routes and supporting each other and this sort of stuff a little bit easier. Ottomans had a decent game as well. I'm kind of a fan of this pick because you get a bunch of free, conquest CBs on Egypt that are low infamy. I think that in particular you do want to play low infamy, but I'm not that confident of it because the cut down to size CB is a little bit obnoxious, and so you can avoid it by not going over really high infamy, but for example, USA went really high infamy in order to brick the war goals on their allies. So if this is very, very, very common, then we'll see something else going on. I think notably an interesting idea is in week 1, we saw Prussia lose Silesia, which they had built up really, really, really tall. And this was just absolutely terrible for the team that this happened. We don't see the same building tall here, at least not until the very end here. And I think that what players could do is they could agree to a resource agreement where they have one state where they are going to encourage resources or encourage manufactories, and they are going to agree not to take each other's state for this. So, for example, Prussia and Russia could have an agreement. Russia won't interfere with Silesia, and Prussia won't interfere with, let's say, Perm, which is much the same for Russia. Okay, so this is kind of what happened. I think that the two things to or there's a ton of things to take home from what happened in the game, but in particular, Great Qing and East India Company seem to have enormous potential for growth. I think the East India Company might be higher rated than, or I might be underrating it generally, because they actually start out with decent tech. They have a lot of discrimination, and they do have the awkward situation where they start out as a subject of Great Britain if Great Britain is not on your team. We saw enormous growth from Great Qing. The end of the game resulted in first place for Team 3, which was Great Qing, Russia, and France. Second place, still second place, despite all this. The USA or Team 1 got second place with Great Britain, USA, and East India Company, who had been annexed towards the very end. Notably, the plan, if we were going to continue this game, which we're not, would have been the USA was planning on releasing England, which would have been possible for the third player to play as, the person who was playing the East India Company. But I think that they would have been very vulnerable to the cut down to size CB, and it's one thing to take a bunch of English provinces, it's another to cut down to size, and then the USA has to release all of this, and so there was all that noise, and then Team 2 struggled. I think in particular the 9th pick is very weak, and there's not really anyone good to take. They took Ottomans. I think the best one might be Spain in 9th pick, but Ottomans is fine and sensible. Like, with this combination, I like it because they're all together, this sort of thing. Okay, so let's jump into potential rules changes. We already discussed one, which was the playing on the lower speed and potential of reducing landings in PvP wars. This is entirely, the landings bit is entirely for performance reasons. A very large portion of the stream was just restarting the game, reloading the game, and so I want to avoid that in the future. We only got 10 years despite going quite a bit longer in game, or sorry, quite a bit longer in terms of the time. And so here are the new rankings for the countries. Let's zoom out a little bit here, and let's talk about these new rankings and kind of where I think things might be. So first of all, this is the second rules change that I think we're going to implement. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I'm going to kind of mention in the Discord that players should be ready for this. The previous draft order was 1-2-2, 3-3-3, 1-1-2-2. I think moving forward, this might be a new draft order that we try, which is Team 1 gets first pick, and then they get, what is this, 5th pick and last pick. Team 2 gets second pick, and then, what is this, 6th and 7th pick. And Team 3 gets 3rd pick, 4th pick, and 8th pick. I think that this might be pretty good. I think that this might allow a little bit more dynamism, notably. So right now, as it seems, with the current draft system, it seems that Team 3 is in a really good position because there are two pairs, I think, that draft really well together. That's Austria-Prussia and UK East India Company, and Team 3 can virtually guarantee themselves that, along with another really strong pick, and they cannot necessarily do this with another one. So just a moment, I'm going to pull something up in regards to, this new draft order. I'm going to pull up a mock draft I did and then pulled everyone about. Okay, so doing a mock draft, this is what I managed to come up with. I thought that, if Team 1 gets first pick, they go for France, and then Team 2 with second pick goes for Great Qing. Team 3 with third and fourth pick would go for UK and Russia. Team 1 again with fifth pick, I think, goes for USA, although East India Company is fair. We'll come back to the rankings. Team 2, now with the next two picks, goes for both Austria and Prussia, preferring the pair of those two over the East India Company, which I think rates higher than Prussia. They could have gone Austria, East India Company. And finally, Team 3 locks in East India Company, getting the UK East India Company pair, and Russia. And then finally, Team 1 gets Spain. This is what I pulled on the YouTube and saw what people thought of this draft, and I was very, very satisfied to see it relatively mixed in terms of the opinions. I do agree with the overall chat that UK, Russia, East India Company is probably the strongest team. I also think that France, USA, Spain is probably the weakest team, although that isn't what people thought in the poll. I do think that they have a lot of fighting power at the start, and so maybe you can make some sort of demands or go after some sort of things at the start. Notably, France is a little bit timely because you have the strongest military at the start, and no one can really win a day one war, I think, against France. If Russia scrapes the barrel, they can generate a higher power projection, but I still think they end up losing a lot of the battles because of combat width, and it's not necessarily... France's skirmish, I think, is particularly strong. So this is what I thought the draft might look like with the new draft order I'm proposing here with 1 2 3 3 1 2 2 3 1. And so I think we might try this, but it's tentative and I'm not sure. Okay, so that's the second rules change we are discussing, or not discussing, but I'm thinking about. Of course, if you want to discuss in the comments, feel free to comment on whether you think this is a better draft order or this is a better draft order. And second, let's talk about the kind of rankings or the countries in light of what happened in the previous game. I still think France is really good. I'm keeping them at number 1, although I think that... I think it's complicated because you have this situation, right, where I think that it is pretty significant that France is... If we evaluate France and UK, France, they start out with their capital not on the coast, and they can bury their capital in Franche-Comté as well, which makes kneecapping them in the same way the UK was kneecapped much, much, much harder if you have to capture the capital, and the capital is way over here, right? And so evaluating a lot of these European countries, like Russia can hide their capital. Austria-Hungary, especially if you have Prussia, good luck getting to Bohemia. You have to go through the mountains. The AI really likes battling in the mountains instead of wrapping around. You probably want to try and wrap around, but even then, really hard to get in there. Prussia is a little bit easier to get into. You can maybe hide your capital down a little bit once you start getting the nationalism thing, but most of the European powers can hide their capital, but not the UK. And so I think UK is really vulnerable to getting cut down, even though they have a really strong start and a really high potential at the start. It's possible you could try and hide your GDP by using bad PMs and then turn up the good PMs at the very end, and that this is like some sort of strategy, but... let's jump back into it. I think France is really good. They can hide their capital. They start out with skirmish infantry. The next one down that has skirmish is USA, which does not have as strong a standing army, or like Eco, and then Prussia, right? And UK as well, but they can't hide their capital. So, I think that we learned a little bit from this game that hiding your capital is pretty good. So we have France still in first place. I think that eco growth potential of Great Qing is insane. We saw it in the game. Let's see if we can pull up the scores. So these were the end scores. Just to kind of go over it, Team 1, despite the fact that they got kneecapped, had a growth of 73 million GDP and 68% from growth from their start, or they were 168% of their start. Team 2 had a growth of 46 million, and they ended up winning on the part of GDP growth percentage. There was a tiebreak between these two to see who would win, and the tiebreak went to Team 1, or who would get second place, and Team 3 had the most GDP growth, a large portion of it on the back of Great Qing here, right? Just enormous growth on the back of Great Qing, whereas, most of the growth that came from Team 1 was the UK and the East India Company. Of course, the East India Company got annexed, but these two had really, really strong growth. The USA, by annexing the East India Company, had this, which is kind of funny, and it was a bit of a laugh in the post-game when I talked about how the USA had performed the best, because memes. Notably, if we take a look, Austria and... Why is this 52? Okay, well, that was a little bit bugged looking, but we saw Austria have come up way high, and Prussia, these guys grew a ton. They also generated a ton of infamy. This is why Prussia couldn't form North German Fed as well. They needed to stay low infamy, but they did not. And then, we have Qing being the main driver here, Qing having more growth than Team 2 all combined, and so coming back up. I think Great Qing are going to have enormous growth and enormous vulnerability, and this is kind of the same with UK, where you're going to have a lot of growth and a lot of vulnerability because you can get landed on. Qing, you have vulnerability because you have a weak military. If you can draft Great Qing and two really strong military guys at the start, like France, Great Qing, Austria, or, France, Great Qing, anyone, basically, other than, the 9th pick, I think you're going to be in pretty good shape, and you just have to navigate a little bit carefully, knowing that the other two teams might try and kneecap you. There was discussions between teams 1 and 2 to kneecap the Great Qing team at the very start, which was Team 3, but they did not materialize because of the scandal in Persia, where the teams 2 and 3 agreed not to take each other's territory, and so this kind of put a kibosh to that sort of idea that they could kneecap them at the start, which Team 3 did not end up being enemy number 1 anyways. It went to Team 1 because they managed to bring out a lot more growth. I brought Russia down. I think that Russia... I overrated Russia a little bit because they start out with pretty bad laws, and in particular, traditionalism will stunt growth at the very start of the game, and so I didn't have a problem bringing them down. I might bring them down again next week if they continue to not necessarily perform, but they have really strong resources and really high pops, and so I think it's potentially the case that you could try and breadbasket with Russia, although they don't have access to dyes and silk, so they're not as good agrarian, but I don't know. This seems reasonable to me, especially if you just take New World territories. Maybe this is really good. But okay. Moving on. United Kingdom kept in the same place, despite the fact that they look like they... I was surprised by how much they could grow, but also evident in the game was the fact that they just got absolutely shellacked at the end. And maybe they should rank even higher than this, but I think that, your inability to defend against landings and try and stall out wars that have a ton of demands on you, this sort of thing, I think that this is a weakness definitely present in the UK. They just got landed 20 times and there was nothing they could do. You can defend against one player landing you, but I don't think you could defend against 6, which is what the UK had to try and do. Next up, we have USA, kind of same spot, kind of same thinking. We have Austria. Austria is notably really good at hiding their capital, but we have seen Austria not perform that well overall. Over here, we have win percentage. I'm giving 50% for second place and 100% for first place in terms of talking about the averages, and Austria has just underperformed. But I think that, if you're looking at the average pick sort of area, this is also a good indicator. I think Prussia's pretty solid, but they've been picked really early and they have yet to make a good showing because they get picked early, and I think this is kind of a product of the draft order really kind of not really being good for Team 2, maybe, where they are getting second and third pick, where, if they had fourth and fifth pick, they would still probably get a really solid pair, and so the value of second and third is somewhat lost, and then they also have the ninth pick, which I think is particularly not valuable. East India Company, we have this little asterisk and a plus. I think they maybe should be higher, but I don't know where to put them. Maybe they're above Austria, and so this is a tentative plus where I don't think it would be insane if East India Company gets drafted in 5th. They have enormous growth potential because they have enormous pops. They do have discrimination problems, and they do have the problem of resolving the awkwardness with the UK at the start of the game if they are on separate teams. If East India Company just gets flat out released, they get an enormous amount of turmoil and radicalism, and I think this makes things difficult for their events, and it is just... but maybe it's fine. Maybe you're okay. They also have enormous growth potential because they can annex all of their subjects. So in terms of infamy to GDP growth by annexing, they're also really good on that front. Prussia, I think, just has enormous growth potential. They start out with skirmish infantry, and this is... we've seen them not perform very well, but I think they're solid. Spain, haven't seen picked yet. I still think that they're probably the strongest pick overall, but I think 9 through 14 maybe. I think that these are all reasonable picks in the 9th position, and so I think that that we haven't seen a Spain isn't necessarily a problem, but I think you can make strong arguments for all these. The Japan argument is they are kind of like a mini China. To whatever extent Great Qing is doing well, Japan has similar characteristics. Ottomans get a bunch of free... You can brick Tanzimat if you force a rev on yourself. You also get a bunch of free, cheap war goals on Egypt, so this is cheaper expansion. And you do start out really backward with tech. Maybe Ottomans are too high. Belgium has some of the best tech and laws. Sweden has really good tech and laws and the best resources in the game, so we bumped them up a couple spots. Brazil, I think, is the strongest New World country other than USA. We downgraded Mexico because USA often goes for Mexico, and so this is a strategic downgrading where I think that if someone other team has USA, I think drafting Mexico is asking for a little bit of trouble. And if you have USA, I think you just want to go after Mexico, so I don't think you draft it and this sort of thing. Netherlands has potential to annex their subject in the Dutch East Indies for getting kind of less infamy and having like decent GDP. They can also keep their subject around for a while. It improves their market, this sort of thing, and go after Belgian provinces. They do have return course CB on them, and so I think that this is all pretty fine. Korea does, I bumped them up a little bit. I think Korea in particular is interesting because you can actually full annex it and then release it to give them better tech and laws and this sort of stuff. And so this is interesting to me because they have an enormous amount of population, or a relatively large population, and they accept Chinese pops. And so if you've got a team like France, Great Qing, Korea, I don't think it's insane to go France, Great Qing, Korea specifically, where you would have, France go for annexing all of Korea, and then Great Qing declares a cut down to size CB on France, as well as a recognition war on France, this type of thing. And then France just backs down to that. They annex all of Korea, and then they release their partner in Korea. And so Korea is given all French laws and this sort of thing. And then Korea can join Great Qing's market. Some sort of strategy like this, I think it's reasonable. Two Sicilies, I think that I think Sweden's just better. As a formable, where you were going for that formable juice to try and boost your GDP and have really high percentage GDP growth. And so, yeah. And then Egypt, I think Egypt's like almost undraftable and should maybe be taken off this list, because I think that Ottomans are just like a stronger version of much the same thing. I don't think that there's too good a reason to draft Egypt over Ottomans, unless you're maybe looking into a situation where it's a 4v4v4, and then Egypt could potentially make sense for strategic reasons. I think that, oh, actually, you know what? Egypt does start out with something. There's one thing. I believe they start out with agrarianism, and I believe that having one teammate go agrarianism, if you can get three teammates all in the same market and having one go agrarianism, I think this strategy might be good. No one's implemented it so far. Notably, like Russia, for example, would have a much easier time passing agrarianism, but their resources are really wood and iron heavy. They're really good stuff, so you would go wood, iron, and agrarian stuff, I guess, and try and get into someone else's market. You can depress your own what's coming into the game. You can depress your own prestige in a couple of ways. You can let one of your opponents or one of your allies, you can have one of your allies humiliate you. You can also turn down military wages all the way in order to get minus army power projection, this sort of stuff. And so maybe in a scenario where you could somehow, I don't know if you can decay Russia into being a major power, but if you can decay Russia, then having them breadbasket makes sense. Having the East India Company breadbasket makes sense, and having Great Qing breadbasket makes sense in terms of like these upper picks, where if you can get them in the market, all three people in one market might be really, really, really strong. But yeah, this has been kind of an overview of how thinking of all the picks moving forward. I hope this video has been interesting. We will be doing another game at 9:30 PST this Saturday. Deadlines for signups are going to be tomorrow evening. If you want to join, feel free to put in the Discord, and you have my bow in the LFG section, which will sign you up. We are giving priority to people who haven't played yet, or people who have played fewer of the games. So there's still, if you haven't played any games, there's still slots available for you, but there's about a 24-hour time period for signing up before I'll announce the teams on Thursday, going into, again, 9:30 a.m. PST on Saturday, and also for this, I'm thinking we're going to play till 1:15, and we're just going to have this be the timing. This is the idea. We're just going to play from 9:30 to 1:15. I tried to make it so we just play 14 years no matter what, but towards the end, the game was taking too long, and a lot of people had to go, and so this caused problems, and so I think it's easier for people to commit to 9:30 to 1:15 for the games. So yeah, all of that, and if you are interested in seeing more of this, of course, subscribe. If you like this video, feel free to like it, hit the notification bell, etc. And other than that, have a good day.